In just a little under a month, we're going to finally see the release of the Nintendo Switch Lite, and along with it, we're going to get a lot of releases of officially licensed accessories designed specifically just for it. However, when it comes to unofficial accessories, things that are just being pumped out, well, there's quite a few options you can already buy right now on Amazon. So we ordered a bunch of them, and we're going to take a look at them. First off, one of the things that I immediately wanted to kind of get a sense of is grips for the Switch Lite. Yes, we know in concept that it's smaller, but just how much smaller is it in actuality? There's always that idea of, reading measurements and then actually having the thing in your hand. So there's a lot of grip cases you can grab, like this one right here, which gives you a sense of that size difference when you have it side by side with a Nintendo Switch. Now, obviously, the grip case is larger than what the Switch Lite would be because the Switch Lite has to fit inside of it, so you have to kind of take a little bit off the top there, but just seeing them together like this, you get an immediate sense of how the Switch Lite is definitely smaller all around, and you get a feel for how it would be in your hand with a grip case like this. Now, there are a lot of different grip case options already out there that have a lot of different specific features to balance out different aspects of the Switch. For instance, there's harder cases like this one that add actual grips to the Switch Lite because much like the regular Switch, it still has that same flat shape that, while great for portability, isn't necessarily great for your hands. Now, this was a really popular option for the regular Switch. There's a lot of popular grips out there, like from Satisfy and Skull & Co. And there's more choices coming out that give you alternative options, like the Hori Split Pad Pro, which actually replaces the Joy-Cons with full-blown larger grip-style controllers. That's not an option for the Switch Lite, however, because it is a smaller size and has Joy-Cons you cannot remove. So there's gonna be whole new grip cases designs like this coming out to help fill that niche right away. Now, of course, all grip designs don't need to be hard like this. A lot of the other options are more like a gel or rubber, which is honestly a lot better from a protection standpoint. If you drop the Switch Lite in a hard case like that, it's just going to transfer all the force from the case into the Switch unless the case itself just totally shatters, which is still not good. A gel case like this, on the other hand, is going to help absorb impact. It's still better to not drop the Switch, but this is going to at least help alleviate some of that potential damage. Now, this is designed to be a bit more of a simple, straightforward protective case, but something it does offer as a kind of little extra added feature that's neat is it has grooves right here for fitting 2 Switch games. So you have a way to, on the go, hide additional games you want to use for your Switch Lite, and if you ever need to switch them out, you just pop it out of the case, put them in, good to go. Obviously, a full protective carrying case is going to give you more full storage than that, but if you don't like carrying one of those around and you just want something that's very compact, this is a cool all-in-one solution. And then going back to that first case we actually held up, something that this does the other cases don't do is adds an actual little fold-out kickstand for if you want to use the Switch Lite in tabletop mode, because unlike the regular Switch, the Switch Lite does not have a kickstand at all, which honestly is basically the same thing because the kickstand on the regular Switch is useless. Now, this does bring up an interesting topic too about the Switch Lite, is the idea of whether or not a kickstand edition... What fell out of this? Rich, what did you buy?
Do you see it? Oh, I see it. Oh. So dope. Yeah.
No, I got it. It's like a pin that holds in the kickstand. So, as a great example of why buying early, cheap products isn't always the best idea, they can fall apart right in the middle of shooting a video. Thanks, Amazon. Anyways, the point isn't that you should necessarily grab this case, it's just bringing up an illustration of the idea of how necessary a kickstand is going to be for the Switch Lite. Because as Nintendo themselves have said, the Switch Lite doesn't really have a tabletop mode. Not just because it doesn't have a kickstand, but because of the smaller screen size, the use of something like that is a little more questionable. Now, looking at all 3 of these cases side by side, there's a couple different things that we can also learn about the Switch Lite as well. As we've seen in photos before, the top half has all the same kind of ports and outputs that we see on the regular Switch. There's the game card slot right here, place to plug in a headphone jack, vents which are more centered on the Switch Lite where they're a kind of little offset on the regular Switch, volume buttons over here, and then power button. Where things are a little different is on the bottom though. So you still have the main hole for having the USB-C port for, charging the Switch Lite. Obviously not gonna use it for a regular dock because you can't dock it. But something interesting I noticed is the little lines right here. And that caused me to look up some pictures of the Switch Lite, and I realized something that I hadn't noticed before. See, on the regular Switch, The speakers are kind of hidden on the bezel for the front screen. They're right here on the bottom front. The Switch Lite doesn't have those. The bezel is considerably smaller, and instead they've moved these little speakers to now being on the bottom lining right here. So that's why there's this little opening on all these different little case designs. And what's interesting about this is that it changes the location of the speakers, and I'm wondering how much this is going to impact how sound actually works on the Switch Lite, whether or not having it certain angles isn't going to sound as good. So it's going to be really interesting to look at when the Switch Lite is actually out. Now, moving on from protective cases, something else to look at are carrying cases, which having this one right here that we picked up made me notice something immediately about the Switch Lite, and that since it's a smaller Switch, carrying cases for it are going to be smaller, which also means carrying less stuff in general. As an example, I've got my case that I'm going to use for my regular Switch right here, and you'll see that we have a row of 6 Switch game cards right here. Now, it's a single row, and there's other designs out there that offer multiple rows, even up to 3, where you can carry a lot of games all at once. On this design, it does have double rows, but it only actually fits 4 games at a time. You could probably make one that's a little longer to fill more games, but the point is, since it's a smaller case for a smaller Switch, there's less room to put other things in it. This is especially a problem for things like the AC adapter, because that already barely fits in most cases for the regular Switch. It's gonna be interesting to see how many companies address that issue in Switch Lite case designs if you wanna be able to bring that power brick along with you, because that is not gonna fit with this thing right now. Now, while all of this stuff is early release product you can get that's designed for the Switch Lite specifically, it's worth noting there's a lot of stuff out there made for the regular Switch that work on the Switch Lite perfectly fine, because it has nothing to do with the size of the system, doesn't have to fit it in any kind of special way. For instance, something that every Switch needs is storage space, because there is some on board for the Switch and Switch Lite, but it's not really enough if you're buying any games that are digital only. If you ever buy DLC, it's just gonna fill up super fast. So something you can grab right now in advance is a micro SD card for the Switch Lite. They go on sale all the time, so if you find a great price on a large size one that you can get, grab it right now and have it ready for when the Switch Lite comes out. Something else that people get a little weirded out with on the Switch is battery solutions, because there were those issues that went on for a little bit where, if you use certain third-party chargers, certain third-party docks, it would brick your Switch. But having external power options for the Switch is still a really great thing to have. So if you want to be on the safer side, really good options that exist right now that you can buy come from Anker. They're one of the few battery companies right now that make an officially licensed battery bank for the Switch, which doesn't just mean that it has, Switch logos on the battery bank, but it's actually designed to push power at the exact style that the Switch takes in. So it's gonna make sure that it's efficient and it's not pushing anything overboard on it, so it's not gonna accidentally short the Switch out. While the Switch Lite and even the new Switch have better battery lives than the original launch Switch, it's still not enough if you're going to be on a trip or going somewhere a lot. It's still going to go through the battery really fast, especially if you're playing any really intensive games. So having something like this on hand is super handy. And they also come in 2 different sizes. This is the smaller, more affordable one, but they do have a much larger one available if you really want to have as much power as possible. One other accessory that's interesting and taps in a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with the kickstand case is a charge stand. Now again, having a regular dock for the Switch Lite doesn't really mean anything because you can't put it out to a TV. It won't even fit in a regular Switch dock because of the smaller screen and having the sticks closer together. But having something that allows you to charge it and have it in tabletop mode simultaneously is still something people might be interested in having. Now, this particular charge stand is designed to have both the Switch Lite charging in the front and a Pro controller in the back, and it brings up an interesting idea. Now, like I said earlier, with the kickstand option on a Switch Lite, it's kind of confusing because tabletop mode isn't something that's super appealing on a smaller screen for multiplayer. But something where it could be useful, especially in a setup like this, is for those games that you want to really play using a Pro controller instead of relying on the built-in controls on a Switch Lite. As we said, the regular Switch in handheld mode is not super comfortable, and I can't imagine the Switch Lite being any better. That kind of thin design is great for portability, but just not for your hands. And so I can see a lot of people wanting to use additional controllers when they can, and having the option of hooking up a Pro controller is definitely the kind of situation where you would use the Switch Lite in a tabletop style mode. You're going to want to sit really close to it, but it's still going to work out a lot better for a single player game experience versus, again, trying to do that kind of multiplayer split screen thing all in one smaller screen. Worth noting too is that just like with the regular Switch, this does have the little groove design right there. So again, the Switch Lite's going to rely on that same kind of weird form of protection where it's not going to let you use any USB-C charge stand you have. It has to have that exact kind of grooving to make sure that it stays in place properly and is fitted for the Switch Lite specifically. Going back to something we talked about earlier too, there's also the idea of grabbing a Pro Controller for your Switch Lite, because again, while the Switch Lite is cool for portability, it's not necessarily always going to be the most comfortable option out there. So if that's your main Switch, it's a really good idea to have some kind of additional controller on hand, especially for certain more intensive games that need a proper controller. Now, there are a lot of other controllers out there designed for the Switch, but because the Switch Lite is not designed to be used with a dock, a lot of the wired ones out there are just not going to be a good choice because they don't actually have a convenient way to plug into the Switch Lite. So you're going to want to focus on wireless ones, where the Switch Pro Controller is a great fit. Other ones that I would also really like to recommend include 8BitDo's SN30 Pro Plus and PowerA's wireless controller. Going hand in hand with this, if you're going to be using a Pro Controller, obviously you're not holding the Switch Lite, so you need some way to put it in tabletop mode because there's no kickstand on it. So a great option, aside from buying a specially designed case, is just a little tablet stand like this. They've made a bunch of branded ones for the regular Switch, and while the Switch Lite is a little different in shape, it's just a little bit thinner, which isn't going to be an issue with something like this. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of other Switch accessories designed for the Switch Lite specifically that are officially licensed, coming out on the same day as the Switch Lite, and a lot of them are already up for pre-order. Nintendo themselves have recently revealed an actual folio case for the Switch Lite, so it's not really meant to be a full protective one, but one that just blocks the screen and keeps it nice and snug, so if you want to put it in a backpack or anything, it's not going to get scratched up by other things in the bag. Meanwhile, PDP has already announced a number of different carrying cases for it. Some are designed kind of like the one we showed earlier, where it is a scaled-down, smaller case that will fit the Switch Lite specifically. One of the more interesting ideas I actually saw from them is that they unveiled a larger case design, which still fits a regular Nintendo Switch. At least they have a similar one that's the same dimensions, but for the Switch Lite, it just has some additional foaming on the inside to fit the Switch Lite, keeping it nice and snug, but not giving up any of the additional carrying space that you need for games, accessories, chargers, so on and so forth. Hori has probably announced the largest diverse array of accessories for the Switch Lite so far, including screen protectors for it, because obviously screen protectors for the regular Switch aren't going to fit it, smaller screen. One of the more interesting things is they actually had a charging stand, kind of like the one we showed earlier, where it's a place you can put the Switch Lite on it to charge it and have it plugged into a wall, but on top of that, it actually has USB ports, so you can use wired controllers if you like. So a lot of the stuff is already available for pre-order. If you're impatient and you just want to grab stuff right away, you can do that. I am planning on grabbing most of this stuff and looking it all over to really figure out what the best accessories are to grab for the Switch Lite.